it.
All
Hello,
right.
you guys. Welcome. It's so great to have you here. Welcome to Wisdom Soup. I knew that you guys were going to be interested in today's guest. I just knew it. Hey, hello. So good to see you guys. So great to have everybody joining in. All right. So Michael's here. I see lots of members of our Soul Convergence group are here. Annie is here. All right. Awesome. And Cecilia too. Hi. And Ivo, how are you? How have you been? It's great to see so many familiar faces. And Adrienne, one of our dream analysts. Woohoo. So, all right. So for those of you who are new, let me go ahead and make myself visible. Do I have powers, Wendy? Can I get powers? I think you have all the powers. I need some powers.
I am God. I'll be right with you.
All right. Hey, Mary. Hello. So,
Wow.
yeah, so I just want to make sure I can do highlighting and spotlighting. Here we are.
Okay. Well, what a
All right.
great family you got there.
Oh, I know. So this is a great group. So this is our Wisdom Soup group. So welcome those of you who know us well, including Molly, who's been part of Wisdom Soup since day one, who was so awesome. I love you, Molly. Back then, we were meeting in person here, and it was in Bellevue. And it was a big part of my journey where I was on my spiritual path and I was thinking about leaving my corporate life and becoming a healer. And everyone was like, you can't make a living doing that. And you're crazy. But I need new friends. So I put my flag in the ground, right? I rented a theater in downtown Bellevue and I put a listing on Meetup and like 25 people showed up.
Wow.
I was like the first sacrificial lamb. I was the first speaker. And then after that, every month I would find somebody new to come in and present. And it turns out there was a lot of people around me who were interested in this stuff. So I found a whole new group of friends, among whom one was Molly, who came and always brought a couple of friends. And it just became this amazing support for me and for them. And so it was something I cared about so much because it meant so much to me that even when I moved down to California, I flew back to Seattle every month to host Wisdom Soup so that we
Wow.
could all meet again. And so anyways, it's been a part of my journey. And I now love this forum as a way of shining a light on other practitioners, on other people who are sharing really interesting perspectives and knowledge. And the whole idea of Wisdom Soup, the idea is that you get to make your own soup. When you make soup, you get to put whatever in it you like, right? If you have extra stuff in the fridge, you throw it in your soup. But so we present, we find all different types of ideas, and you get to decide what you put in your soup and what you don't. But the idea is to be open-minded, is to expose ourselves to new things. And for me, I think this is super important because I have found that through the progress of my journey, there were things that in the beginning I was not at all ready for. Like I was like, no way. I thought crystals were rocks. I was like, there's a lot of things. And it hasn't been like you think it would be like all at once. I'd be like, yay, I embrace it all. I'm skeptical. So I did not. And it has been a process of me having my own personal experiences with things where I have gradually accepted more and more things, put more and more ingredients in my soup. And so that's the idea is you get exposed to things, you realize that the people who talk about this stuff are not crazy, right? Despite how they're portrayed in the news and portrayed in mainstream media. These are just normal. You guys know I was I worked in corporate America for years. I was like as normal as the most normal person out there. So, and now I'm super not. Now I'm super, super woo-woo. And I love it. So it is great to have all you guys with us. And like I said, many of you, I have wonderful relationships. I'm so happy to see Dougie here, who's come with me on retreats. And it's just great to come together. It's a fabulous community.
Wow.
So, and of course, you guys know Wendy, who works with me regularly and who is an amazing support to this whole community. And she's our CEO of Angel Operations. So, All right. So, and let me make sure we have everybody muted. And then I want you guys to know as we're talking today that if you guys have stuff that comes up, Alan is totally open and ready to talk to us about everything. He's open, an open book. As a matter of fact, he has written an open book, which we will talk about. But so if you have questions or thoughts for him, put them in the chat, and I will be monitoring the chat and then sharing those questions with him. So in case you guys have thoughts or things you want to share. I bet you David's going to have some questions, right? I see you there, David. Hello. Good to see you. So, okay, so just to introduce you to Alan, I met Alan when I was in Sedona, the perfect place to talk about ETs. When I was there just recently for a conference, which was super fun. And he, as you guys may have heard of him already, he has been into this stuff for his entire life, like 25 years or something like that. He's been on this journey, and he has shared when we actually, because he was there, and we got to have lunch together one day, and he told me some amazing stories. He showed me pictures of him meditating with the hugging saint, if you know her. And so I mean, like, he has been there in the middle of all this stuff emerging, which is super cool. So he brings all of that richness of experience to his speaking. So he's definitely considered one of the country's leading experts on UFO activity, right? And it all started for him. He had a sighting in 1987, which he says pulled him down the rabbit hole to everything related to this phenomena. He's also served as the executive producer on 2 feature-length documentary films on UFOs. So he's the author of this. This is his book. It's called Making Contact, Preparing for the New Realities of Extraterrestrial Existence. And then he has a podcast that goes with it called New Realities, which I had the pleasure to be on a couple times as we were leading up to our Sedona experience. And this one he's got amazing, like, it's when you look at this, his connections run so deep in our community. He's got, forwards written by Deepak Chopra, and it's like everybody who's like you've heard of is mentioned in this book. So it's like he's been around the block, which is cool. So anyways, with that introduction, I would love to introduce you guys to Alan Steinfeld. And let me go ahead and see if I can spotlight you.
Oh,
There we go. All right, welcome, Alan.
thank you so much for that introduction. How's my sound?
You
Okay.
sound great. Yeah, you sound good.
Listening to all those things that you mentioned about me, I felt like I didn't have a choice. I couldn't go into the corporate world. I couldn't, sit behind a desk for 20 years or whatever. I just, even if it meant, not having that much money, I had to be out and following my passion, going to workshops, investigating the unknown. And we talked when we had lunch that I said what got me on the path was having a teacher like Ramtha who said, we're here to make known the unknown, which
Yeah.
means we add to creation as creators. So the most exciting thing I could think of doing was looking at what is the unknown? Where can human consciousness go that it hasn't gone before?
I
And so,
absolutely love that. That really makes me think about, like, in one of the more recent messages I got from the angels, they've been talking all about the shift in consciousness and the flash of light that's coming. And they were describing what happens when we get to the other side. And they said that it will be like we will think we have brain fog, because it will be like we go into that space and things won't be crisp yet. And they said it's not because we have brain fog. They said it's because it's not created yet, and that we are the creators, and we will be creating that new reality as we enter it. So I think your perspective, and you mentioned that at lunch, and I got all excited because I'm like, yes, it's so true on so many levels.
well, what you said about brain fog, I describe it more as the difference between comprehension versus apprehension. So
Yeah.
comprehension, you're collapsing the wave function. You're saying, okay, this is a tree, that is a house, and what's happening as these dimensions shift is that those things we thought we had named and put, okay, you stand in front of a tree and you call that a tree, and you miss the great being that is there. So as we move away from those defined, very narrow definitions of reality, it does become a sort of fog until you realize, well, it's all a fog, and we're here to navigate through the ethers and function in a different level without the concretizing of reality. So we're not collapsing the wave function, so everything becomes more of a wave, not a particle.
I
If
love
that
it.
makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense to me.
Mm.
And only because I've been thinking about it for a long time. If I hadn't been, it would not probably, but now I'm with you. I'm right there with you.
Yes.
So, okay, so here's the big question everyone wants to know.
Okay.
What was your experience with ETs? What happened? Can you take us through it?
Yes. Well, I have to say my personal experience is not as dramatic as some people like Whitley Strieber, I think is one of the best, but I was always obsessed with ETs from when I was young. All I could do was read science fiction and go to other planets or parallel worlds because I just knew this was not the only place. You look up at the stars, and as I write in my book, I put my way to get my book on from Amazon. I knew that those stars out there were like these porch lights of houses in the distance. That was my feeling from a child point of view. So I just felt, how could the universe must be full of life. It must be because the earth is full of life. And are we just a freak of nature? Did it just happen here and nowhere else? I mean, that's kind of egocentric. I think what's here, life, consciousness, is a part of creation. So that was always in my awareness. And then meeting beings, teachers, people on a higher state, people who are vibrating at a different rate. Being around that actually opens me up too, opens everyone up because we move out of the density. You know, Bashar, if you know who Bashar is, he says, this is your last chance for density, folks. So get it while you can because we're moving out of it. It doesn't
Yeah.
get any denser than this. And we are just going. Does that make sense, Anne? That we are
100%. Yes, absolutely.
so because I mean, I never expected to have an experience. I mean, I thought I saw things out a window, like little strange faces at the window when I was like 2 or 3 years old, and it just always pulled me as if I wasn't from this place, you know? I mean,
Mm.
yeah, I had a very nice family, very, very human, a lot of drama, baseball games, Cub Scouts, all that. And I just didn't feel part of it. But anyway, so what happened to me is getting back to your question. I was driving cross country with this girlfriend who I had met in Sedona. And we had a really great, it's almost as if we were like put together because I felt her when she walked into the room and I said, who is that? And we connected. And then I was driving. It was the year of the harmonic convergence, if anyone's familiar with that. It was
Yeah.
1987,
Yeah.
August. And there were like, that was the first New Age holiday, if you want to call it that. That was
Yeah.
like, and it was before the internet, but people were gathering in all these sacred spots around the world, really. So I went to Sedona, see, oh, did I want to be there? And then I went up to the Northwest, and then I ended up in Woodstock. But anyway, the woman I met in Sedona flew out to the Northwest, and then we started to drive back east from the West Coast.
Hmm.
And we left the Oregon Country Fair, and drove about 12 hours through the night to, I think it was like western Nebraska we ended up in. And in
Huh.
western Nebraska, we were just really tired. We pulled off the road down this little dirt road that said enter at your own risk. And I wasn't sure what that sign meant, but I
It
figured
was
out
like a little
later
foreshadowing, right?
it was. It was, but I think it actually meant because the irrigation canals flood at certain times of the year.
Oh,
So,
okay.
but it was a sign, so you always have to look at the signs. But that's what I learned after. So we're there, and we're just really tired from driving, and we just fall asleep. We just, in a way, pass out. I mean, we were tired. We didn't just pass out, but and then we wake up in the morning in the same position we went to bed in. And that was, I mean, who remembers that? I don't know how I went to bed last night, but somehow it felt like we were frozen in time, animated, suspended animation, and we passed out and then woke up. That was my sense of that experience. And it felt kind of creepy around there. We just wanted to get out of there. I thought for a moment, did anything happen? And I go, nah, no, and just left because a lot of times when you have these contact experience, it is blocked out of your mind, sometimes for years, you know,
Mm.
or decades. And sometimes people never actually remember their contact experience. But when I finally got back to New York, I was out at the pool. It was summer, and my mother noticed. My mother, I think, has is part of that lineage of contact, although she'll deny it. She noticed there was a four-prong mark at the back of my knee, which, like, who looks at the back of your knee? And she said, "Well, what's that?" I said, "Oh, it must be a spider bite or something like that." But I just happened to meet that week people who connected with Bud Hopkins, and Bud Hopkins was the father of the UFO abduction scenario. I mean, he didn't invent it or didn't create it, but it existed. But he kind of categorized that. So I asked someone part of the Intruder Foundation group, "Hey, what's this?" And he goes, "Oh, that's an abduction mark." And I said, "Really?" And that just freaked me out. It's like, and then immediately I went back to that place out in Western Nebraska and said, "Oh, did something happen?" And then I called my girlfriend, she was regressed, and she goes, "Yes, we had this contact where we were lifted out of the van, and we, they took some genetic material from us, which they do, and I have a whole theory about that." So,
So she
but
had like a hypnotic regression. She went
yeah,
through
she
a
had a hypnotic. I didn't want to do a hypnotic regression until a while back because I thought it would be too much to integrate. But eventually I did, and I did see. You see, the one thing about hypnotic regression is that you're not, and I think other people don't say it, but it's my experience. You're not actually remembering something as if you remember what happened yesterday because you weren't really present in your normal state to forget it or to experience it. So when you meet these beings, you are shifted. And this is what I've learned later. When they're in your field, your consciousness is distorted because the frequency of their consciousness is so different than ours that unless you're lucid enough, and I recommend practice lucid dreaming in order to meet the ETs because their field, not because it's bad, it's just different. It distorts our field. It's
uh,
like trying to get Wi-Fi on an AM radio. It's just we don't have the frequency for it. We have the capacity for that, but we're not used to functioning at that frequency, which is what your work is so important because you're talking about the shift in frequency because we're not going to integrate those new realities at the old frequency. So I do think the ET experience and those contacts is to raise our cellular consciousness vibration so we can meet the flash and everything that comes with it, and be prepared for that. So that's sort of the assistance of those other realms. So when I was regressed, I saw those beings, but not in a memory. It's if I was imagining it, but it's not quite it's like I teach remote viewing and it's the same sort of
yeah. It's
muscle.
kind of
When you
almost like a
remote,
clairvoyant vision, like where
yeah, it's like a clairvoyance. It's like your imagination, but it's so far outside. I mean, that's the only thing I can relate it to, but it's not because these images appear and you're not creating it
yeah,
in the
yeah,
regression and also in the remote viewing. I should do a
yeah,
talk about remote viewing on one of your shows because,
yeah,
but
yeah.
so when I had this regression, I saw these beings and they were actually very friendly. They weren't hostile. They weren't the grays. They looked more like, and this may be just my screen memory, big birds, like big, but I got the sense I wasn't that deep in the regression, so I just saw that on the level that I could see that,
Uh-huh.
and it wasn't as traumatic as I thought, even though I had waited. So I felt though after that experience, so that's what I saw, and I felt like yeah, they kind of beamed us with light. There was like a light, maybe it's like what you're talking about. A light sort of went through me and my girlfriend's body, and when we woke up the next morning, we were vibrating differently, but I wasn't aware of it until all these things sort of came back to me.
I totally relate to what you're saying about how, like, as a channel, when I'm channeling, I'm there, but I can't recall things the same way that I can when I'm present in my body. So I know what you mean about when you're in an altered state. It's like you're
Right.
there, but like I can remember images, but I can't remember words. It's like different
Right.
parts of your brain get activated or whatever. So I understand what you're saying, but it's so interesting that you feel like it's just being in their presence
Mm.
would make it hard for us to, because you hear about that. People are in UFO situations and it's like they can't seem to tie their shoe, you know?
Right. Like, have you ever been around like a high guru lama, a really high being? It will focus your field in a way that's not your normal consciousness. Or if
Mhm.
you've been around crazy people, I mean, really like, you know, psychotic, delusional people, you start to feel that weird energy. I mean, if you're empathic, so that's a distortion in the field too. And then you're around like good friends there, they kind of realign you, or you come home to your house where you have all your things in place. That's a like that's the world you've created. So it kind of puts you back into your center. But when you're around these beings, they are very different vibrationally. And I think, and I sort of, it's my hypothesis, that the sun, your solar star, calibrates your consciousness. So when you go to a being from another star system, their consciousness is calibrated at a different frequency, and maybe stargazing would help, adjust those. But when you're in those fields, you have to practice lucid awareness. That's the only thing I can say. Like, you have to be as lucid as you can in the dream. So when you're meeting these beings, and actually Bashar says this too, because when Daryl met Bashar, he thought he was dissolving his ego sense. So it does challenge your ego sense. That's why we can't stay attached to who we think we are when you're in the presence of beings or altered states. You know what I
So
mean?
this is so interesting to me because so one of the things that Angel said before, they only recently started talking about ETs. Like for years, it was like nothing. I was kind of curious, like, will they ever talk about it? And then all of a sudden it was a series of messages that came through about it. And they said that we are like a garden of the universe, that our DNA is like a garden of the universe, and that we are members of the galaxy. Like we almost like you were saying, okay, so if we are calibrated to our sun,
Mhm.
it's like they said that it's like with that theory in mind, they said that basically it's like we have a passport to all these other universes because of the fact that it's part of our DNA. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, yeah, no, it totally makes sense. So yeah, we're calibrated to a certain frequency, and what's happening with the light, this is I'm just figuring it out, is that we are being totally upgraded in that instant, and we could either go with the upgrade or try to stay attached to what we've already known. And that's why what you're saying around the world to people is so important, to let go of these old identities and these old ways we think of ourselves, because they're part of an old frequency. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's why it's important you're doing what you're doing, Anne, because people
Thank
need to know there's more to reality than what they thought they were. You know?
Yeah, thank you so much. Well,
Yeah.
so okay, so now everybody is, of course, going to want to know what happened. Like, why do you? And so I know this because I read the book, but why did they abduct you?
Um, I mean, why? I think they actually abduct a lot, or abduction is a strange word. I think they are really, there's this whole debate in the UFO field, and I'm really in the field because I go to all the conferences. This book is a collection of essays by the people I think are the smartest, most informed. And there's an agreement on some level, but on other levels, everyone has their own take on the phenomena. And that's one of the reasons the government doesn't know, isn't coming forward. They don't know what to say because nobody knows. Are they good or are they bad? So that's the big debate. Are they here to help us, or are they here just for their own purposes? And I think they actually are here. I mean, their bedside manners are not great, when they taking DNA, but some people say maybe it's to preserve the human DNA, or maybe it's to create hybrids of, because they had lost their ability to procreate. And I don't mind being the father of an alien race if that's what it takes. So or being contribute to that, because that's sort of a nice honor, if
Yes.
it's true. I mean,
Yeah.
Bashar, I mean, I keep quoting Bashar because he actually did acknowledge that there was an abduction and that my genetics went into a lineage that then eventually created where those guys are from. So,
Okay, so we slow down there because you can't
okay.
just drop that into a conversation and move on. That's a big one.
Okay.
So Bashar says, so to explain this. So for those of you who don't know Bashar,
Mm,
so Bashar is he is like he's a channeled being
yeah.
who is from so he is a hybrid of another, and he's like half human, half something else. Isn't that
He's
right?
half human, half gray. The little grays with the big eyes. This
Okay.
is my theory and others. They came and are abducting people, and there's probably other reasons, to get our genetics, which are full of emotion. You know, one thing humans have in abundance is our ability to emote and feel. And I
Yeah.
think, and there's probably a lot of versions of this, they bred their ability to feel out of them. They became pure intellect and they hit a dead end. They realized, well, you can't get to God with your intellect, you know. So they've
Mm.
come back through time and space to get the thing that is most abundant in us, our ability to feel. And our
Oh,
ability to
interesting.
feel combined with their fantastic intellect, because they are more intellectually evolved, has created a hybrid race. And some people say, oh, those hybrids are coming here. And according to Bashar, is like, no, there's lots of viable planets around. So Bashar's is an offspring of the human hybrid program, and they went to a place called Sasani, which is 300 years in the future, and Bashar's from that, and making sure that we stay in a way. He's here as a first contact specialist. That's who Bashar says he is, which
Okay.
makes what's coming, and I don't know if he's talked exactly about what you said, but it is a vibrational shift we're going through, and that's really the contact experience, and that's really, in a way, why I call this book Making Contact, because it's not just making contact with ETs, it's making contact with who we are, our essential nature, and the earth, and each other in a vibrational way. You know, we're all
Yeah.
learning that because the world has become a flat land. You know, it's just become materiality, and now, or it had been for the last couple of hundred years since we lost our connection to spirit, and now we're coming back to the fact that we are vibrational beings. We have this eternal nature, and how are we going to work with that? So
Yeah.
that's why I think the ETs are here. There's a guy in my book who, I mean, this book is a compilation, and there's one essay by John Mack, who was a Harvard psychiatrist. He's part of the Harvard psychiatry department. And he's no longer on the planet, but he started to work with people having these contact experiences. And he said, these people are not crazy. He kind of confirmed it. These people are having real experiences. And Harvard tried to throw him out, says, you can't talk about ETs at Harvard. And he said, and then because of freedom of speech and people like Danny Sheehan, who defended him, said, no, it's okay to talk about whatever you want. And so he confirmed for some people that they were having a real experience. Like, I would think I was crazy if I was saying this without the help of someone like John Mack. So when I got an essay that had never been published before by John, and I published it for the first time here. But he
Mm.
says UFOs, ETs are like they're like an outreach program from the universe for the consciously impaired, and that's us, the consciously
Mm.
impaired. It's kind of a
Wow.
joke.
Wow. So, and just to follow up for those of you who have not heard of Bashar, he's channeled by a guy named Daryl. His last name is Anka. Isn't that how you
Yeah,
pronounce it?
Darren Anka. He's related to Paul Anka. Actually, I'll
Okay.
put my link to that interview in the chat too.
Okay,
So
thank you. So,
yes,
but yeah, so, and it's interesting. So he channels this being named Bashar, who is half human, half another race. And so interesting, this idea that other races would have maybe leaned too hard into intellect and lost their ability to create from the heart. So, and that would explain why they would come back and want to, or maybe lost their ability to reproduce, right? That would make
exactly.
a ton of sense to me, because you have to create through the heart is how we just meant to create. So anyway, so
Right.
fascinating.
And it's a warning for us because we are going down that path with AI and computerized everything, and if we need to maintain our ability to feel, and I think that's one of the reasons everything the angels are telling us is about not going down that alternative timeline. So this is I'm
Yeah.
just putting my interview with Bashar
Yeah,
in
yeah,
context.
and it's interesting. I think also that the angel, so as part of this conversation that they brought in just recently about ETs, where they had several messages in a row about this,
Mhm,
they
mhm,
said that kind of the where we're headed
mhm,
is we are meant to, we go through, we're having all these events coming up that are kind of the difficult unraveling, which is the part we kind of have to just make it through. And then we get to, we're having all these energies, we're raising our vibration, raising our, oh, you just disappeared. You were abducted. No,
Oh, I was.
just kidding.
No, I'm trying to get the sun out of my face here because,
Okay, no problem.
anyway, here I am.
All
Okay.
right, thank you. But
You're welcome.
anyways, so we're having all of these.
Thank you.
There's currently more energies hitting the planet. Like right now, we're having crazy solar activity, and the angels came in back in like the summer, and they said now through like November it was going to be like peak energy, and they'd been right. Like it's been like more and more like intense solar energies. But they said the big one, the flash of light, is meant to bring us into this heightened state of like this sixth sense where we have emotional telepathy with one another. And that is sort of the key ingredient that we need for humanity to finally find its way to world peace. It's that idea that if we can feel each other's feelings,
Mhm.
then we won't fight with one another because we will be like fighting with
Right.
ourselves. And
Right.
that is supposed to, and this is the big like drum roll, is that is supposed to open the door for us to claiming our role as galactic citizens. Like that's supposed to open the door for ETs to come. Does that
That's
match
right.
your understanding?
Yeah, well, the more you talk about the angels, the more my feeling, and it might not be yours, is that they're actually what we call ultra-terrestrials. They're beings that are not like ETs, but they're higher dimensional, maybe once human, maybe never human, but guardians of the universe, if you want to call them, but not angels for me in the traditional sense, because I think, I mean, I don't know, this is my definition of angel, but they may be. I'm just saying they sound more like ultra terrestrials the more you talk about, in my definition of what that means. And if
Yeah,
you read
oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
no, if you read the third chapter in my book, JJ and Desiree Hurtak talk about what that means, ultra terrestrials. So yeah,
Yeah, I'd have to read it. I'm not familiar with, I
yeah,
mean, I know that they're different from what I know of as ET. They are unity consciousness and they're not,
right,
their essence, they're everywhere. They're an essence. They're more like
yeah.
when I hear of like dark matter, I think of angels, they're
Oh.
everywhere. So it's, yeah, so they're kind of divine consciousness in a way.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's where we're going. What was the question you asked me, though? I'm sorry. You just
So,
said,
well, I have lots of questions.
oh,
So one
anything
of
you
the other
want.
questions, like, and I don't want to forget the other ones because I think it's so fascinating what you've experienced and now what you've learned through
Yeah.
all these years of talking to other people about their experiences. But can you tell us in your vision your abductors, what they looked like? You said they looked like birds. Like, did they have
Well,
hands? Did they have like how bird-like were they? What made them bird?
I have to say the thing about my experience was not so much, I think, what happened during the experience. It's the effect that it had on me as it focused me in a direction of what is consciousness, who are we, this expansion. But so they were very vague, although I have to say, a couple of months later, maybe it was like a year later, I was woken up in the middle of the night and given this little thing to hold, this little being that may have been an offspring of my genetics, but it looked like a deer. It looked like a deer with these big black eyes. It looked more like an animal than like a human. This is just, you know, I think if we're in our normal state of consciousness, it might be too much to have like holding a little ET in your hand. So, string
Oh, so they made
memory,
it look like a deer so that it wouldn't be scary to you. Oh, how
yes.
fascinating.
And I
So
did say
how
this, I said, this is weird. Why am I holding the, I mean, I didn't relate to it, but I've heard other people had similar things. But what were you
so
saying?
how
Yeah.
conscious were you? So you were woken up in the middle of the night. Like were you aware that there were beings around you when
Well,
this happened?
it was so strange. So I'm sleeping. I'm actually at my parents' house. I was visiting them or something. So in the middle of the night, I feel this rubbing, this like fur on the inside of my thigh, and I felt it 3 times as if this thing had been, you know, rubbing. I mean, it's weird. And then after that, I had woken up, but it felt like I was still dreaming because I went right back to sleep. But in that moment, which I've never forgotten, it was like, those flashbulb moments that you don't forget. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, and so I looked at this little creature, and there were other beings around. I've never really seen those gray, like a lot of people describe, up close, like a lot of people describe. Mine are more amorphous. I mean, I did see those birds. They weren't actually birds, but they had the feeling of big types of creatures, and they were very kind. And actually, I had my regression. They came to visit me that night, and they sort of said, I mean, when they say said, they're like, it's all this telepathic stuff. It's like I was from where they're from. So the closest thing I could to describe them is this artist named Kamara Jones on Instagram. She does Art Soldier 77, and those beings with the big heads and eyes, and I don't think they have a nose or a mouth. They look like that, and they're filled. If you go to Instagram, Art Soldier 77,
Hmm.
they are these being, and she keeps drawing them, and she's sort of obsessed with them, and
Yeah.
so I like someone asked, I haven't really had experiences with other races because
Yeah, so
people like to
Andrea was just asking about mantis. Do you know anybody who has ever met or talked about a mantis?
yes, I know a lot of people. I know someone who channels a mantis, this guy
Oh,
Tony
wow.
Ghazi. So, I do think there's a lot of different races out there. So that's what I'm saying. Other people have more fantastic stories, but I think for me, it wasn't so much that experience. It was what was planted in my mind to do the research and bring these stories to the public. I think that's
Yes.
one of the reasons it didn't freak me out as much as it does other people, because people are traumatized. Just imagine you're home alone, the doors are locked, the windows are shut, and suddenly someone's at the foot of your bed. I mean, just that alone is enough to traumatize people. So that I don't think that has happened to me. If you read Whitley Strieber's book Communion, he had a lot of trauma from that. And don't, I mean, maybe a little bit because I don't fully remember the whole situation. All I know is something shifted and he started to pursue whatever consciousness was. It just like sucked me into like that feel. I mean, I was into it a little bit before, but then I became obsessed with everything. I mean, I must have 500 books on UFOs
Oh
and,
my
and
gosh.
ETs
Oh.
and, in my little apartment in New York. So, I mean,
Do you mind repeating the name of the person who channels the mantis for Andrea's questioning? She
oh
wants to know.
yeah, Tony Ghazi. He's going to be
Gazzi?
Ghazi. Yeah, he channels
Okay.
the mantis beings.
Okay.
There's a lot of other mantis type work. There was a guy in England who was a mantis communicator. Um, there's people, I mean, for me, it's not so much of naming. I mean, people like to know, are they Pleiadian, Syrian, Andromedan, or people like to call themselves Arcturian. It's like you can name things, but that doesn't mean you know what they are. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't,
Yeah.
because what level of Andromedan are you? What dimension of, because even if you call yourself an earthling, there's dimensions of earth beings here that we're not seeing. So uh, I think we have to know the essence instead of the word,
I
it's kind.
absolutely agree with you that it's more like that's this interesting thing is when I first started channeling the angels, the very first time I connected, they gave me a name. And then, but they said they don't want to give me names because they want me to relate to them as a unity consciousness and that I'm just meant to refer to them as angels. But I recognize when I channel them, I feel different energies and some are familiar. I'm like, oh, you've been in before. Here we go. And sometimes it's new. The only time they specifically called out and said, we're bringing you someone new, was it was early on, and I was seeing them clairvoyantly, and they showed me there was 3 of my angels. They were like, we are, here's people here who are your friends. And then they said, here is a new angel who's coming in to tell you something important. And that was the angel who then came in and started giving me all the information about global disasters and all. But I think because of the nature of what he was going to communicate, they made a point of showing me, like, this is a good guy. You can talk to this person.
Right.
But the good energy. But typically, like I said, it's just it's an energy signature that is distinctive, but there's not necessarily a name attached to it.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I agree with you. So what I think is going to happen, according to Bashar again, is like once the flash hits
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
ETs arrive, we're going to start to understand our true history and how we're actually from the cosmos, how we were
Yeah.
genetically seeded here. So we're actually hybrids ourselves because a lot of different races came in and made the human being. I mean, even if you look at the Bible, it says the Elohim, which is
Yeah.
a plural of God. It's El is the singular, Elohim is the plural. So we're not getting the full story from our religions or even history books, but there is a full story to get about who we are, the nature and the science of soul incarnation. This is what science is. How do we actually get in these bodies? That's
Yeah.
that's a science. It's not, I mean, yes, it's a spiritual understanding, but there really is a science to that. There's a science to incarnation, if you want to call it science. So everything's going to change in the next couple. Our history, our ways of communicating, our technologies. So we think we're really advanced now, but it's nothing compared to where we're going, although it's preparing us for
Yeah.
where we're going because we're like really in the Stone Age. We're still no, we're still using fossil fuel. Fossil fuel, the ability to propel things forward was something that Newton discovered, force out, force back. We're using physics that's 400 years old for our automobiles, airplanes, cars. And, there is a quantum physics, but we don't quite know how to operate it. Maybe some people do. Maybe I think that's what some of the reverse engineering of the ET craft, and that's a big thing in the disclosure field now, is that the US government has about 40 different craft that have either been put down, some people say crashed, some people say put down in order to study, in their possession. And this
Hmm.
is something being covered up by the government. And there's people like Lou Elizondo coming forward saying, no, the US is in possession of crash retrievals. That's what they call them, crash
Wow.
retrievals. And they're hiding this from, I mean, the military, and not to get too much into conspiracy, but it's the military is hiding this from the government, the Senate, the Congress, because and this is my theory, they don't say this, but because they're selling some of this technology of crash retrievals to private industry and someone's getting rich on that. So it's
Wow.
not about ETs. Who cares about ETs, really? It's about technology and money. This is why the whole cover up and push for disclosure needs to happen. So really, I think they're doing something illegal. So it also becomes down to a constitutional issue. If you look at the latest article by Michael Schallenberg, he reveals that there's there's forces inside the Pentagon that are keeping the ET story and technology from government oversight, which is illegal. So when that comes out, and I think the flash, all that's coming with that is going to expose the true nature of government, then we'll finally see some of the truth.
Well, I
Which
definitely think that we're like everything shows there's going to be it's this kind of we can think of it just as awareness, but then that heightened awareness ripples out into how does that heightened awareness express itself in our world. So yeah,
right.
yeah, I agree with you. There's going to be everything starts from the inside. So as we become more aware of ourselves, we will become more aware of what actually is going on in our world too.
Oh,
I
what?
wonder. Oh yeah,
Oh,
go
and someone
ahead.
just said, "What is the flash?" Well, that's sort of your field, but
Oh, so
you
yeah,
can.
so the flash of light is part of this process of shifting of our shift in energy of our heightened state of consciousness. The flash is the angels have described it as the moment that we will look back on as the moment that everything changed. And it is a solar energy that's coming to the planet. They've described it as rainbow starlight. They've given us many, many messages. So those of you who, if any of you joined and are unfamiliar, that I bring messages from the angels every Friday to YouTube. And they've been, and most of the, like the biggest event, there's lots of events leading up to the flash of light, but the flash of light is the biggie. And it is, they said the flash of light will basically bring us up the staircase of in terms of, but they can't push us through the door. That has to be, it's always free choice. So, but once we move through the door, we have a higher consciousness state inside of us that will emerge. And we open up to a sixth sense, and it changes how we are. It's literally like, if you think about think about the shift in consciousness you have when you go from being, when you're really depressed to when you're really elated, when you're really, really happy. And how when you're depressed, you feel like nothing's possible, and you feel like your emotions affect everything that you're perceiving. You're not open to perceiving things as being better. And when you're super high on life, you feel like anything is possible. And you're the same person. You just have two different experiences depending on what you're feeling. Well, those are two states of consciousness, states of awareness. And when we go through the flash of light, take that super elated state and 10x, right? And then we start to see things in a new way that we can't really wrap our heads around now. But anyways, and they said, like I said, when it comes, unmistakable, it will not be like anything else we've ever experienced. So yeah, it hasn't come yet, but.
And it's really exciting, and it really fits in with why the ETs are here. I mean, I know you said they're coming, but I do think some of them are here. And when you see a UFO, and I describe this in my book, it really shifts your consciousness. And if you've seen a UFO, you are entangled. There are no innocent bystanders. It's not like, oh, I just saw a UFO. No, they're so keen on what consciousness is and how to tune into the consciousness of I mean, we're like beacons of light, you know. And how, if we were flying over like this land, would we be able to see an individual on the ground? No, they're seeing the light. They're seeing the or not seeing, but they're feeling into it. I think it's a whole other sense besides, I mean, you talk about that too. Not seeing or feeling, it's actually another sense of whatever that they are seeing or feeling about us. It's like seeing, feeling, knowing. It's all one sense. So that's how they tune into us, is my feeling. Right? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a question for you: is you have had the privilege of being tuned into this whole field for decades.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the coolest, most interesting story experience you have heard?
Well, I'll tell you an embarrassing one. It's not maybe the coolest, but it's one of my experience. And it's a little embarrassing. I mean, in a way. So I'm sitting alone in my apartment, right? And the doors are locked, no one's here. And suddenly I hear a noise, you know. And I'm looking around, and, you know, I'm not noticing anything. And then I hear it again. It's like there's a presence here, you know. And so I'm going back to my desk writing, and suddenly I go, and I see these two little black eyes staring at me. And you know what? It was a mouse in my plant. And it's like, but I know it's embarrassing, but I just saw the eyes, and it's like, wow, there's a consciousness there looking. I know it's true. It's like I went, because all I saw were the eyes, and it's like, and for a moment there was this thing looking at me. And I know it was just this little,
Making
like,
contact with the mouse.
it was a little thing making contact, and it just freaked me out. So imagine if something really full of consciousness is looking at you.
Yes. I imagine it would completely, even if you didn't want to be freaked out, it would probably freak you out.
And that's why we have to be more aware in lucid states. I don't mean drugs, but I mean other states of being, other states of awareness. So like ordinary consciousness is one thing, but if you can practice alpha states, that's good. There are these biofeedback things, or even things called the muse, that shifts your consciousness, and you could start to function in these then you're more prepared for these interactions. So okay, but what are some of the other stories that you asked about? Well, I've talked to people. I don't know if I believe them or not. They said they've been taken off planet. I actually, Travis Walton is a friend. He was missing. He was a lumberjack in the pine forests of Arizona. It's a famous story. It's called, he wrote a book called Fire in the Sky. And he's driving along these dirt roads in the forest and he sees this ship and he runs towards this ship because it's there. It's like, oh my God, he's so excited. He runs toward and he's blasted with this light and he's like falls to the ground and the people he were with, they drive away because they don't want to be blasted too. And then they said, what are we doing? We're leaving Travis there. So they come back to look for him and he's not there. And they call out search parties and he's missing for 5 days. And suddenly, well, suddenly, but he only remembers a half hour being aboard a ship and he thinks he was revived by the aliens aboard the ship because they weren't expecting him because be spontaneous. They don't like spontaneity, the aliens. But he spontaneously ran and he was blasted by this light and he thought he was brought back to life by them. But anyway, he appears after 5 days at this telephone booth. This was in the 80s. And he, and they were out looking for him. They could not find him. And if you want to hear that story, it's Fire in the Sky is the name of that book. There's a story
Amazing.
also of Betty and Barney Hill. Do you
Mhm.
know about who they were?
No.
They're actually kicked off the whole abduction topic, and they were an interracial couple, which was unusual in the early 1960s. And I think they had something to do with, I think they were picked because of that, you know, pointing out that there is no differences between races. But anyway, Betty and Barney Hill were driving along in New Hampshire, and they see this light overhead, and Barney takes out his binoculars and he say, well, that's not an airplane. And they just get off in their car and somehow they arrive home, but there's 2 hours of missing time where they don't remember anything. It's a classical abduction case where you don't remember because they do have the ability, these ETs, to dilate time. I think that's what happened to me when I was taken aboard or to experiment. It's like time didn't seem to happen. So this happens to Betty and Barney Hill in 1961. There's actually a plaque on the side of the road on Route 3 in New Hampshire outside of Indian Head where you can say this is where Betty and Barney Hill, you can see it was put up by the state of New Hampshire saying this is the spot Betty and Barney Hill were taken by
That's so
aliens
cool.
on the
Wow.
night. Yeah, I know it's very strange. So they finally were regressed back to the time, that missing time, those
Okay.
2 hours, and they remembered under hypnosis that they had this experience on board a ship. I do remember being on board a ship, though, at one point. I have lots of experience, and they come back to me occasionally. I felt like I was floated up through the window, and I was walking around on this ship, or may have been a ship, because again, you're in this like really altered state. So
Hmm.
it's hard to know. I think I have to practice lucid awareness because I want to get more clear. And I think that you see that when the light comes, everyone will be raised, I feel, to that frequency. So it'll be easier to interface with those beings. That's my
Yeah,
feeling. So,
I
but
think
I
you're
was
right.
aboard a ship, and what happened was I kept touching like my third eye for whatever reason. And I got the understanding like, oh, they can't work with me anymore because I was too much in control of my own awareness. That was the sort of, and that may have been the last time I was aboard a ship, whatever a ship is. But I did see someone who I had not, and she looked like she was sort of tied up or struggling or something. This woman, and the next day or something, I went to some Unity service, and the woman was there at this, and I didn't want to go up to her and say, "Hey, were you taken aboard a UFO?" So I I said to her, I said hello, and I said, "How are you feeling lately?" And she says to me, "I never felt better in my life," which was sort of like, "Oh, well, maybe." I didn't expect her to say that. I expect her
Yeah.
to say, but she said that, which was sort of like, I'm not saying it's all good to be in contact because some people are traumatized. They become
Yeah.
drug addicts, alcoholics because they can't deal with that. I think that level of contact is shifted. I mean, maybe
Hmm.
some people are still freaked out, but as we human consciousness are raised to this other vibrational frequency, there'll be more craft coming, and the exchange with these beings will be less traumatic and more integrated. But it's really about letting go of who you think you are. You're not your name, your history, your past, your lineage, your family, or your baseball team, or your political party. All those things that people are so attached to limits their capacity to expand into the field.
I absolutely agree. And that is something the angels have said like repeatedly, this idea of letting go of our attachments, of our expectations about who we
Right.
are, what we do, this
Right.
idea of that it's almost like if you walk into a room and you're expecting to see oranges and you walk into a room that's full of aliens and there are oranges on the table, the only thing you're going to see is the oranges, right?
Exactly.
And it's kind of like this idea that our expectations frame what we perceive, and we could literally not even see the things. And I always use the example, if anybody has ever bought something that was expensive that really calls your attention, like if you ever bought a new car or a really expensive whatever it is, pair of shoes or whatever, and up until that time you never saw them anywhere, but the minute you focus on it and you buy one, all of a sudden they're everywhere. And it's not that they've changed, it's not that all of a sudden there's more of them, it's just that all of a sudden your perception is altered and now you see them.
You're so right. As a saying by Heraclitus, a Greek philosopher, he said, expect the unexpected because it's difficult and hard to find. Because we have to welcome the unknown. You know, when people are always afraid of the unknown, but they're only afraid of what they know projected onto the unknown. The unknown is full of infinite possibilities
Yes.
and adventure. So you're looking at the chat. Is someone saying anything interesting?
I just was looking, people are commenting, Patty had an experience where she saw 3 silver discs,
Wow.
which is really cool. And she said it changed her perspective on the story forever, which is awesome. I was gonna add something that is so interesting to me, how so many things overlap, like the way that the angels talk about things and how it's just like, to me, it's like when truth aligns,
Yeah.
But they've talked about how we will, as we move through the shift in consciousness, that we will be freed from time, that we will still have time, but we will have the ability to expand time. So the way I think of it is like, imagine this, imagine that you have plans at noon to go meet a friend for lunch, but you're in the middle of painting your house and you're like, wow, I need 3 extra hours to finish this job. I'm going to expand my 3 hours so that it's my time, so it's longer, but then you can still get there at noon, right? Like you're still inside of time, but you're taking a moment, and it's crazy to think about, but it's kind of like, it sounds like what you've experienced
Well,
with
it sounds
the UFO
exactly. I mean, the way
community.
you described it is like, yes, there's time, but their consciousness, you see, it's all comes down to consciousness.
Yeah.
Their consciousness is so much more sophisticated that they can expand time or freeze time for someone else. It's not a technology, it's the ability of their mind. And we think of consciousness as one thing. And I use the analogy of, if you think of consciousness in this one thing way, then it's like a telephone that's attached by a cord, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we thought telephones were. It was just someone on the other line. And now we have these telephones that can do so much more than just a telephone attached to the cord. So if I went back in time and said, guess what? I have a telephone where I could like take pictures or make schedules or watch movies, you would think I was crazy, because to you back in the 1960s and 70s, the telephone was just this one thing. How could it do all those other things?
Yeah.
That's how we're thinking of consciousness. We're thinking of consciousness as just awareness. And we're not thinking of it as an application where you could send and receive, you could send healing, you could stop time. We have that capacity, except we've been stuck in the old matrix where we haven't been allowed to explore the applications of consciousness. So
We're still on the dial-up phone. Yeah. I
Yes.
love it. It's a great metaphor. I love that.
I'm glad you get it, because it just came to me.
Yeah.
We're so limited in what we think consciousness is, and we have this incredible capacity to do fantastic things. Bend spoon, stop time, teleport, remote view. So it's, yes, it's not one thing.
So cool.
What does Jeanir says?
We're at the top of the hour now. So we and I want to leave time for people to find out where and how to find you. So Alan, tell us, so what is the best way for people to find your book and to find
Oh,
your podcast?
well, I'll put the book into the chat. Is that
Okay.
good?
And then
On
let us know
Amazon.
too, for those of us, those who will be watching it later on our
Oh,
Wisdom
wait,
Soup
this is,
channel.
I just, oh, sorry. That is my Bashar interview, if you want to know who
Okay,
Bashar is.
fantastic.
And
Thank you
I,
so much.
and I think Bashar is one of the more amazing. I mean, a lot of people are channeling because a part of their consciousness is opening up to these other realms. So that's why channeling is such a phenomenon because we're really learning how to navigate this thing called the consciousness field. So,
Yeah.
um, and let me see. So my website is, oh, I'm sorry. Let me erase this. Is newrealities.com, and my book
Newrealities.com. Perfect.
and my YouTube is youtube.com/new realities.
Okay.
Um, yes,
And then
so let
how
me,
about the book? Where can they find your
okay,
book?
I'm going to just put the book online here as soon as I
Is it on
get it.
Amazon?
It's on Amazon. Look up Making Contact, Preparing for the New Realities of Extraterrestrial Existence. And I'll put that in the chat too. Are you seeing? Oh, that's the chat there. Oh, wait, let
Beautiful.
me,
And
wait.
Sujata is putting it on the in
Oh,
the
thank
chat
you,
as well. So that's awesome.
Sanjata is an old friend of mine and a
Oh, how
beautiful being.
nice. Oh, I'm
Yes,
so glad that they came. That's so great.
yes. So my people can contact me through my email, newrealities@earthlink.net. And actually, if you want to get the if you want to get the introduction, I'll give people on your call the introduction to Making Contact for free if they just send me a message saying introduction to this email, earthlink.newrealities at earthlink. Oh, no, it's .net. Sorry, I spelled it wrong.
New
It's
realities at
newrealities at
earthlink.net.
earthlink.net.
So
Sorry,
if they
not.
send you an email there requesting the introduction, you'll send them that for free.
I'll send them a PDF of my introduction, and then if they like it, they can buy the whole book or
Great.
whatever.
Yeah,
But
wonderful. Thank you so much for that.
Anne, I really appreciate your questions and how open you are to these other realities. And I mean, you're so much more than just the messenger of these
Thank you.
You're expanding as this human being, and you're
Thank you.
trying to connect all the dots, which I really appreciate what you're
Thank you. Well,
doing.
it's to me, I love it. It's like getting into a book and you don't know where it's taking you, and it just picture just expands and expands. And so it's really like how low will you go?
Well, that's what
How far will you go? Let it
our
flow.
future is
Yeah.
going to be about that. That's where we're
Yeah.
going into. Everything we thought was real and true is going to be kind of upgraded to
Yeah,
something
I
unknown.
totally agree. Yeah, it's such a fun experience. So, I mean, to me, it's like it's never boring. There's always something new to discover. So I love it.
Absolutely. Thank
Thank
you,
you so
everyone,
much.
for watching.
Yeah,
Michael,
thank you guys so much for being with us today. Thank you so much, Alan. Phenomenal conversation.
oh,
So interesting. And you guys, thank you so much for being here, being part of this community. We will be back again for Wisdom Soup next month. It's always on the second Thursday of the month at usually 10 a.m. Pacific. Sometimes we change the time, but it's always on the second Thursday of the month.
mm.
All right, you guys.
And
Thank you
if
so much.
people
Thank
have
you, Wendy,
questions,
for being
I
here.
just want to say, if people do have questions, they can email me too. And
Beautiful. Oh,
thanks,
thank you so much for
Anne.
being
I
so open.
appreciate you.
All right, you guys. Thank you. See you soon. Bye-bye.